After 15 years presiding over the harshest criminal cases in the state, I had seen enough human suffering to last several lifetimes. The weight of sentencing decisions had worn grooves into my soul, and the constant scrutiny of being Judge Alexander Reeves had become suffocating. When the opportunity arose to retire early at 55, I seized it without hesitation. I wanted anonymity. I wanted peace. I wanted a place where my name did not carry the weight of thousands of legal decisions. The modest colonial home in Oakwood Springs seemed perfect. 2 stories of warm red brick with white trim, situated on a corner lot with mature oak trees providing natural privacy. Not ostentatious like my colleagues might expect of a senior judge, but comfortable and dignified. The neighborhood boasted well-maintained properties, quiet streets, and proximity to both nature trails and urban conveniences. I signed the papers immediately. Moving day arrived on a crisp September morning. As the movers arranged my furniture, mostly antiques inherited from my grandmother, I noticed a woman with a flowing scarf walking her small dog. She waved enthusiastically, changing direction to approach my driveway. "Welcome to Oakwood Springs. I am Elaine from 3 doors down," she said, extending her hand. "We have been wondering who bought the Matthews place. Such a lovely home." I introduced myself simply as Alex, offering no details about my profession. After years of being recognized and treated differently because of my position, the anonymity felt refreshing. Elaine chatted about neighborhood particulars, garbage collection days, the best local restaurants, and the community events calendar. "We have a neighborhood barbecue this weekend at the Park Pavilion," she mentioned. "Perfect timing for you to meet everyone. Though fair warning, pace yourself with Martha's potato salad." Her wink suggested inside knowledge I was not yet privy to but would soon learn. Over my first week, several neighbors brought welcome gifts. The Patels from across the street arrived with homemade samosas. The Johnsons next door offered a bottle of local wine. Each interaction reinforced my decision. This was the sanctuary I had been seeking. I spent evenings on my porch swing, watching fireflies emerge as twilight settled. For the first time in decades, I felt my shoulders relaxing, the tension of courtroom battles fading. I established simple pleasures: morning coffee in the garden, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evenings with books I had long postponed reading. I planted marigolds along the front path and hung wind chimes that played soft melodies in the afternoon breeze. Small touches to make this house truly mine. It was during one such walk that I first heard murmurs about the homeowners association. 2 women speaking in hushed tones as I passed. "Jennifer got another notice yesterday, 3rd one this month about her bird bath." Of course she did. You know how Diane is about water features not pre-approved by her committee. They noticed me and smiled politely, changing the subject. I filed the exchange away, making a mental note to review the HOA regulations more carefully. In my career, I had witnessed how seemingly small authorities could become breeding grounds for petty tyranny. Still, I remained optimistic. The neighborhood barbecue arrived on Saturday. Tables laden with potluck offerings stretched beneath the park pavilion. Children played on nearby swings while adults clustered in conversational groups. I was speaking with retired Professor Jim Harmon about his prize-winning tomatoes when the atmosphere subtly shifted. A woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a clipboard moved through the gathering like royalty expecting deference. Conversations quieted momentarily as she passed. She wore designer casual wear and a permanent smile that displayed perfect teeth while never reaching her eyes. "That is Diane Keller," Jim whispered. "HOA president for 5 years running. Watch yourself, she takes the rules very seriously." I observed as Diane approached a young couple, commenting on their recent fence installation with sugary venom wrapped in concern. The husband's jaw tightened as she referenced potential citations if the stain color was not corrected promptly. As she turned, our eyes met, and she assessed me with calculation before approaching. "You must be our newest resident," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Welcome to Oakwood Springs. I trust you received our welcome packet with the community guidelines." I had not, but nodded pleasantly. Something in her demeanor, the clipboard held like a shield, the scanning eyes noting my casual attire, triggered a familiar warning. In my courtroom, I had encountered many like her, individuals intoxicated by even the smallest measure of authority. "Lovely to meet you," I replied, revealing nothing. "I am looking forward to being part of the community." She smiled tightly, making a note on her clipboard. "We maintain very high standards here, very high standards indeed." By mid-October, the brilliance of autumn had transformed Oakwood Springs. The maples and oaks surrounding my property blazed in crimson and gold, creating a perfect backdrop for the improvements I had planned. Having thoroughly studied the HOA guidelines, I began implementing modest upgrades to my new home. I started in the front garden, replacing overgrown shrubs with native perennials selected for their drought resistance and seasonal blooms. The existing garden bed borders needed refurbishing, so I ordered stone edging in the exact shade and style approved in the HOA handbook, page 23. Next came repairs to the wooden fence separating my property from the walking path, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing posts that had weakened over time. My most ambitious project was a small fountain for the side garden, visible only from my kitchen window and back patio. The design was simple: 3 stacked stone basins with water recirculating through a hidden pump. I had confirmed its compliance with noise regulations and filed proper paperwork with the HOA Architectural Committee, receiving written approval. The morning after installing the fountain, a sharp knock interrupted my breakfast. Through the window, I spotted Diane Keller on my porch, clipboard clutched against her chest, foot tapping impatiently. I opened the door, maintaining a pleasant expression despite the unexpectedness of her visit. "Good morning, Diane. What brings you by so early?" "I have received reports of unauthorized landscaping modifications to your property," she announced, peering past me as if expecting to catch glimpses of forbidden renovations. "All modifications have been properly documented and approved," I replied calmly. "Would you like to see the paperwork?" Without waiting for her response, I retrieved the folder containing approval forms, receipts, and relevant HOA guidelines. Diane flipped through them with narrowed eyes, clearly disappointed to find everything in order. "The fountain exceeds the permitted height by 3 inches, she declared, though I knew this was false. "The guidelines specify a maximum height of 36 inches. My fountain stands at 32. I produced the manufacturer's specifications and my own measurements." Her lips tightened momentarily before she found another angle of attack. "The stone edging color appears darker than what was approved." "They were delivered directly from the HOA-approved supplier," I explained. "Perhaps they appear darker because they are currently wet from this morning's dew." For 20 minutes this continued, Diane raising increasingly arbitrary concerns, me calmly addressing each with documentation or reasonable explanation. Finally, unable to find legitimate violations, she closed her clipboard with a snap. "I will be keeping an eye on things, Mr. Reeves. Oakwood Springs has standards to maintain." Her tone carried unmistakable warning. "We have ways of handling residents who do not respect our community values." After she left, I called my neighbor Elaine, ostensibly to ask about local nurseries for additional plants. Our conversation naturally drifted to my morning visitor. "Diane came by your place, already." Elaine sounded genuinely concerned. "That was faster than usual. It took her 3 weeks to target me when I moved in." "Target?" I inquired. Elaine hesitated before sharing what many residents had experienced. Diane had a pattern of selecting certain homeowners, usually those who showed any independence or questioned her authority, for special scrutiny. The Patels had endured 6 months of harassment over their vegetable garden until they finally removed it. Retired schoolteacher Martha Jennings received weekly violations for her bird feeders until she finally moved away. The stories continued, revealing a disturbing pattern of selective enforcement and intimidation. I thanked Elaine for her candor and spent the afternoon methodically documenting my property with photographs, noting the date and time of each image. Years in the legal system had taught me the value of establishing baseline evidence before disputes escalated. The following week brought the first official violation notice, slipped into my mailbox in a bright orange envelope. "Urgent. Compliance required," screamed the bold text across the top. The alleged infraction: unauthorized wind chimes exceeding acceptable noise levels. The wind chimes, a housewarming gift from the Johnsons, were specifically designed for soft tones and well within the decibel limits specified in the HOA guidelines. I photographed them, measured their length also within guidelines, and recorded their sound with a decibel meter app. All documentation went into my growing file. 3 days later came another notice: improper storage of garden hose visible from street. I had coiled the hose neatly on its designated holder, but apparently this was insufficient. I purchased an approved hose cabinet and documented the change. The notices continued, each more trivial than the last. Mail not collected promptly. Recycling bin visible from street for 47 minutes after collection. Unauthorized doormat color. Each received my calm compliance and meticulous documentation. Behind my placid exterior, something was awakening. The methodical, strategic mind that had made me one of the most effective judges in the state. I was being tested, and unlike Diane's previous targets, I understood exactly what was happening. This was not merely about garden hoses or wind chimes. This was about power and control, about establishing dominance through 1,000 paper cuts of bureaucratic harassment. After 6 weeks of escalating notices and thinly veiled threats, I received notification of the annual judicial conference in Chicago. Normally, I would have declined, having retired from active bench duties. However, I was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, and several former colleagues had personally requested my attendance. Despite my concerns about leaving my home unattended amid the growing tensions with Diane, I made arrangements to attend. The conference would last 3 days, Friday through Sunday. I confirmed my travel plans and discreetly installed additional security measures, motion-activated cameras at key points around my property, hidden from casual observation but providing comprehensive coverage of all approach angles. Given Diane's increasingly aggressive behavior, I considered this precaution prudent rather than paranoid. Thursday evening, I informed my neighbor Jim of my planned absence, asking him to collect any packages that might arrive. I mentioned simply that I had a professional obligation without specifying my judicial connection. Jim promised to keep an eye on things, adding with a worried glance, "Watch out for Diane. She tends to make her rounds more frequently when people are away." The conference provided a welcome respite from neighborhood tensions. Surrounded by respected colleagues and engaged in meaningful discussions about judicial ethics and reform, I briefly recaptured the sense of purpose that had defined my career. Former clerks sought my advice on complex cases. Young judges requested mentorship. The Lifetime Achievement ceremony on Saturday evening was both humbling and affirming. Sunday afternoon, I flew home with renewed perspective. Perhaps I had overreacted to Diane's behavior. Perhaps with patience and consistent documentation, the situation would resolve itself. These thoughts occupied me during the taxi ride from the airport to Oakwood Springs. As we turned onto my street, however, my attention was drawn to unusual activity near my home, neighbors standing in small clusters, pointing and talking in hushed tones. The taxi driver slowed, uncertain. "That your place, sir?" I leaned forward, stomach tightening as my property came into view. Even from a distance, something was clearly wrong. The driver stopped at my driveway and I exited slowly, taking in the full extent of the destruction. My garden had been systematically demolished. Flowering plants lay uprooted and scattered across the lawn like casualties of a vicious battle. Mulch had been kicked onto the sidewalk and driveway. The stone edging I had so carefully installed was now broken into jagged pieces. Most devastating was my small fountain, smashed beyond recognition, water still pooling around its shattered remains. But the vandalism extended beyond simple destruction. Across my freshly repaired fence, spray-painted in garish red letters, were the words "Follow rules or leave." The message removed any doubt about the perpetrator's identity and motivation. Several neighbors approached cautiously, expressions ranging from shock to sympathy. Elaine hurried over from her property, visibly distressed. "Alex, this is horrible. I noticed it this morning and called Jim right away. We were trying to reach you." "Did anyone see what happened?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Heads shook. The damage had apparently occurred overnight, discovered only when early risers walked their dogs past my property. Jim approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Should we call the police?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," I replied, my judicial instincts taking over. "Let me assess everything first." I walked the perimeter of my property, photographing each instance of damage with methodical precision. The violation went beyond the physical destruction. This was my sanctuary, my retreat from the world of conflict and judgment. Its desecration felt deeply personal, an invasion that transcended property damage. Inside my home, I found everything untouched. The vandals had limited their attack to the exterior, a public statement rather than a private violation. I went directly to my security system, downloading the footage from the previous night. The system had performed perfectly, capturing high-definition video despite the darkness. On my laptop screen, the evidence unfolded with damning clarity. At 2:14 a.m., 3 figures approached my property from different directions, converging at my front garden. Even with faces partially obscured by hooded sweatshirts, their identities were unmistakable. Diane Keller and 2 men I recognized as HOA board members, Robert Phillips and Thomas Green. The footage showed Diane clearly directing the operation, pointing to specific areas to be targeted. Robert wielded a crowbar against my fountain while Thomas systematically uprooted plants. Diane herself applied the spray paint to my fence, her message both literal and symbolic. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes, efficient, premeditated destruction. I watched the footage twice more, a strange calm settling over me. In my years on the bench, I had presided over countless cases where people believed themselves above the law. I had seen the arrogance of those who thought their positions protected them from consequences. Now, I was witnessing the same behavior in my own neighborhood. The anger that rose within me was not the hot rage of immediate retaliation, but the cold, focused determination I had brought to my most complex cases. This would require strategy, evidence, and patience. Justice was rarely swift, but when properly executed, it was thorough and definitive. I secured the video footage on multiple devices and cloud locations, ensuring it could not be lost or compromised. I took additional photographs of the damage from multiple angles, documenting each destroyed plant, each broken stone, each splinter of my shattered fountain. I collected samples of the spray paint and noted shoe impressions in the soft soil of my garden beds. Several neighbors offered help with cleanup, but I politely declined. "Not yet," I explained. "I need to properly document everything first." As twilight approached, I sat on my porch steps surveying the destruction. A lesser opponent might have been intimidated into compliance or driven to impulsive retaliation. Diane clearly expected one of these outcomes. What she could not know was that she had vandalized the home of someone who had spent decades ensuring that justice, however delayed, was ultimately served. I would not confront her directly. Not yet. The judge in me knew that the most effective response would require preparation, evidence, and strategic timing. The game Diane had initiated would be played by my rules now. Rules forged through years of ensuring that those who believed themselves above the law discovered just how wrong they were. The morning after discovering the vandalism, I waited until precisely 8:30 a.m. before making a phone call. Marcus Delaney had been not only my law school classmate, but also one of the most formidable property attorneys in the state. Now semi-retired, he consulted selectively on cases that interested him. This, I suspected, would capture his attention immediately. "Alex, been ages. What has the honorable judge calling me at this hour?" His voice carried the familiar mix of intelligence and mild sarcasm. "I have a situation that might interest you, Marcus. How do you feel about homeowners associations that commit criminal vandalism?" An hour later, Marcus pulled into my driveway in his vintage Jaguar. He surveyed the destruction, whistling softly between his teeth. "Subtle they are not," he commented, examining the spray-painted message. "You have evidence." I led him inside and played the security footage. Marcus watched intently, occasionally pausing to take notes. When the video concluded, he leaned back in his chair. "That is not just vandalism, Alex. That is targeted harassment and potentially criminal mischief. The premeditation is clear. The property damage exceeds felony thresholds in this state, and if we can establish a pattern, there could be civil rights implications." We moved to my back patio, the only area untouched by the destruction. Over coffee, I shared my complete documentation of the escalating conflict, every notice, every interaction, photographs before and after each complaint. Marcus reviewed the materials with growing interest. "Classic abuse of authority," he observed. "But they picked the wrong target this time. Let us examine the HOA bylaws and covenant restrictions." Together, we spent hours analyzing the Oakwood Springs HOA charter. Marcus identified numerous procedural violations in how Diane had been operating. Proper notification periods for alleged violations had been ignored. The appeals process outlined in the bylaws had never been communicated to residents. Mandatory quarterly board meetings had been conducted without required advance notice to all homeowners. "This gives us leverage," Marcus noted, "but there is something bigger here. Have you requested access to the HOA financial records?" "Not yet," I replied. "You should. As a homeowner, you have the right to review them. I have seen this pattern before. Petty dictators like Diane often have financial motivations beneath their power trips." That afternoon, I submitted a formal request for comprehensive HOA financial records from the past 5 years, citing the specific bylaw that entitled homeowners to this information. The request was exactly formatted according to requirements, leaving no procedural loophole for denial. While awaiting response, Marcus and I expanded our investigation. We created a timeline correlating the escalation of harassment with key events in the neighborhood. We identified every board member and researched their connections to Diane. Most importantly, we began discreetly documenting instances where HOA rules were enforced inconsistently, strict application for some homeowners, complete leniency for others. 3 days after submitting my request, the HOA treasurer, a nervous accountant named Walter Simmons, delivered a partially redacted financial record. Even with the obvious omissions, the documents revealed concerning patterns. Landscaping contracts consistently awarded to Green Valley Services, owned by Diane's brother-in-law, at rates significantly above market value. Administrative expenses that lacked detailed accounting. Special assessments collected for infrastructure improvements that appeared to have never been completed. Follow the money, Marcus advised, examining the records. This appears to go beyond garden variety power tripping. I suspect financial impropriety. We compiled a comprehensive legal strategy that addressed multiple fronts: the criminal vandalism, the pattern of harassment, procedural violations of HOA bylaws, and potential financial misconduct. Marcus drafted cease and desist letters that remained unsent, ammunition held in reserve for the right moment. What they expect, Marcus observed as we finalized our strategy, is either intimidated compliance or angry confrontation. Both play to their advantage. What they do not expect is methodical, legally sound response backed by irrefutable evidence. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. Throughout my judicial career, I had witnessed countless individuals undone not by their initial actions, but by their responses when challenged. Diane and her allies would likely escalate when they realized their vandalism had not achieved its intended effect. We need to be prepared for that escalation, I told Marcus. And we need to understand the community dynamics better. How many others has she targeted, who might be allies in establishing a pattern of behavior? As sunset cast long shadows across my damaged garden, Marcus and I outlined our next steps. I would begin quietly building relationships with other homeowners, gathering their experiences with Diane's regime. Marcus would prepare legal documents for various contingencies, criminal complaints, civil litigation, regulatory interventions. The most important thing, Marcus reminded me as he prepared to leave, is patience. Let her believe she has won this round. Let her confidence grow. People like Diane Keller inevitably overreach when they think they are untouchable. I smiled for the first time since discovering the vandalism. In my courtroom, I always found that justice requires 3 things: clear evidence, proper procedure, and the right timing. We have the first 2 already. Now we wait for the third. What Diane could not possibly know was that she had vandalized the home of someone who had spent a lifetime ensuring that justice, though sometimes delayed, was ultimately served with precision and finality. The gavel would fall on her petty kingdom, but only after every piece of evidence was in place. With my garden still in ruins, a deliberate decision to preserve evidence, I began hosting small gatherings of neighbors. I positioned these as casual consultations about restoration options, creating natural opportunities for conversation about neighborhood dynamics. Elaine helped coordinate, discreetly inviting those she knew had experienced conflicts with Diane. My first gathering included just 4 neighbors, seated on my back patio with lemonade and cookies on a Sunday afternoon. The conversation began tentatively, with sympathetic comments about my vandalized garden. Gradually, with gentle prompting, their own stories emerged. Robert and James Wilson, an elderly couple who had lived in Oakwood Springs for 15 years, shared how Diane had forced them to remove the accessibility ramp leading to their front door. Despite providing medical documentation justifying the necessity of the ramp, they faced daily fines until they complied. "We installed it when Robert's arthritis worsened," James explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Diane claimed it violated aesthetic standards. We had to remove it, and now Robert can barely manage the front steps." Sarah Jensen, a young mother of 3, recounted how her children's modest tree swing had become a 3-month battle ending with a threat of lien against their property. "The children were devastated when we had to take it down," she said quietly. "The swing was in our backyard, not even visible from the street, but Diane claimed it was an unauthorized recreational structure." Michael Peterson, a Vietnam veteran, described his fight to display an American flag on a pole in his front yard. She quoted regulations about height restrictions and proper lighting, then kept changing the requirements every time I complied with the previous ones. Each story revealed a consistent pattern of targeted harassment, selective enforcement, and escalating threats. More importantly, each neighbor had preserved documentation, email exchanges, violation notices, photographs, even recorded conversations with board members. Together, they formed a damning picture of systematic abuse of power. As word spread about my gatherings, more neighbors requested to attend. Our Sunday meetings grew from 4 participants to 8, then 15. I maintained a calm, listening presence, encouraging them to share while documenting each account. By the 3rd week, patterns became clear. Diane targeted independent-minded residents, those who questioned her authority, and particularly those whose properties she seemed to covet for unnamed associates. Meanwhile, the professional investigator Marcus recommended was quietly examining public records beyond the HOA documents. His findings proved illuminating. Of the 7 homeowners who had sold their properties after prolonged conflicts with Diane, 5 had sold significantly below market value. 3 of those properties had been purchased by limited liability companies that, when traced through legal filings, connected to Diane's husband's real estate development business. "Classic property flipping scheme," the investigator explained during our discreet meeting at Marcus's office. "Harass homeowners until they sell cheap, then renovate minimally and resell at market rates." The HOA even approved expedited renovations for these properties, renovations that would have been denied to original owners. The investigation also revealed selective enforcement in stark terms. Homes belonging to Diane's friends or business associates violated numerous regulations with impunity. Unapproved paint colors, oversized storage sheds, even rental operations that violated clear prohibitions in the covenant. Meanwhile, targeted homeowners received violations for infractions as minor as mail left in mailboxes overnight. As our coalition grew, Diane seemed to sense the shifting dynamics. Her tactics escalated accordingly. An emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, when most working residents could not attend. The agenda included a substantial special assessment for community improvements, with costs disproportionately allocated to properties with recent violations, primarily those belonging to members of our growing group. Most concerning was the specific assessment levied against my property: $4,500 for landscape remediation necessitated by homeowner neglect. The description explicitly referenced my vandalized garden, essentially charging me for the damage Diane herself had orchestrated. Rather than protesting publicly, I encouraged our group to document this latest abuse while maintaining a low profile. Let her believe we are individually intimidated, I advised during a strategy session. Her confidence will make her careless. The strategy proved effective. Emboldened by apparent submission, Diane escalated further. Violation notices doubled. Threatened fines increased. Emergency board meetings became weekly occurrences, each implementing new restrictions with minimal notice. During this period of escalation, our quietest ally emerged as our most valuable. Martha Whitfield, an 83-year-old resident who had lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA formation, invited me to her home one evening. From a carefully preserved filing cabinet, she produced the original covenant documents from 30 years prior, along with all subsequent amendments. "I have watched that woman twist these rules for years," Martha said, her aged hands trembling slightly as she laid out the papers. "My husband helped write the original covenants. They were meant to maintain property values, not terrorize neighbors." The original documents revealed stunning discrepancies. Many of Diane's most frequently cited regulations did not exist in any approved amendment. Others had been selectively edited or misinterpreted beyond recognition. Most significantly, the enforcement mechanisms Diane employed, from daily fines to threats of property liens, had no legal basis in the binding documents. With Martha's permission, I made complete copies of these original documents, incontrovertible evidence that many of Diane's rules were fabrications designed to intimidate rather than legitimate governance measures. As summer heat intensified, our investigation compiled overwhelming evidence across multiple fronts. The vandalism itself, documented in high-definition video. The pattern of targeted harassment, supported by dozens of homeowner testimonies. The selective enforcement, demonstrated through comparative property documentation. The financial improprieties, traced through public records. And now, the fraudulent application of non-existent regulations. The pieces were in place. As Marcus had advised, we had been patient, thorough, and strategic. Now it was time for the endgame, a confrontation Diane Keller could never anticipate, from an adversary she had unwittingly created through her own arrogance. The quarterly HOA general meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on a Thursday evening at the community center. Typically, these meetings drew minimal attendance, a deliberate result of Diane's scheduling and her reputation for shutting down any dissenting voices. This meeting would be different. Members of our coalition arrived early, filling seats methodically according to our plan. We had rehearsed this moment, each person understanding their role. By 6:45, the room was nearly full, an unprecedented turnout that clearly unsettled the board members as they arranged their materials at the front table. Diane arrived precisely at 6:55, her confident stride faltering momentarily as she observed the crowded room. She recovered quickly, plastering on her professional smile as she took her position at the center of the table. The meeting began at 7:00 sharp with roll call and approval of previous minutes, procedural matters that no one typically challenged. The agenda proceeded predictably through committee reports and budget updates. I sat quietly in the third row, my expression neutral as I observed the familiar performance of apparent transparency masking predetermined decisions. When we reached open comments, the portion typically limited to 3 pre-approved speakers, Diane announced that due to the unusual attendance, comments would be restricted to 2 minutes each for a maximum of 3 residents. That was my cue. I stood slowly, purposefully, feeling dozens of eyes tracking my movement as I approached the podium. Diane glanced at her list with a frown. "I do not believe you signed up for comments, Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone suggesting I had committed some grave procedural error. According to Section 4.7 of the bylaws, any homeowner in good standing may address the assembly during general comments without prior registration, I replied calmly but clearly. "I believe I qualify." Her eyes narrowed at my precise citation of the bylaw. "Very well, 2 minutes starting now." I placed my materials on the podium unhurriedly. "Thank you, Madam President. I would like to address several concerns regarding HOA operations." Using the projector I had arranged to have set up earlier, I displayed my first exhibit, a side-by-side comparison of my property before and after the vandalism. 3 months ago, my property was vandalized. Plants destroyed, fountain smashed, fence defaced with spray paint. Fortunately, my security system captured the entire incident. Before Diane could interrupt, I played 30 seconds of the security footage showing her directing the destruction of my garden. Gasps echoed through the room as her face appeared clearly in the infrared lighting. "Mr. Reeves, this is inappropriate and potentially slanderous," Diane interrupted, her voice rising. "This meeting is not the venue for personal grievances." "On the contrary," I continued calmly, "HOA governance and accountability are precisely what this forum exists to address." I advanced to my next exhibit, documentation of procedural violations in HOA operations over the past year. The bylaws require 30 days notice before issuing fines. 78% of fines issued under the current administration violated this requirement. I methodically presented evidence of irregular financial transactions, selective rule enforcement, and falsified meeting minutes. Throughout my presentation, Diane attempted repeatedly to interrupt, her composure visibly cracking as the evidence mounted. When I displayed documentation of the connection between harassment campaigns and below-market property sales benefiting her husband's business, her face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous. I will not stand for these baseless accusations," she shouted, rising from her chair. "Security, please remove Mr. Reeves immediately." The community center had no security, of course. Just another bluff from someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Before you attempt to remove me," I said, my voice dropping to the precise, measured tone I had used in my courtroom for 15 years, "you should know that I am Judge Alexander Reeves, recently retired from the district court where any legal action regarding this HOA would be filed." The room erupted in murmurs of shock and recognition. Diane's face drained of color as the implications dawned on her. "Furthermore," I continued over the growing noise, "the evidence presented here has already been submitted to the district attorney's office, along with sworn statements from 17 residents detailing systematic harassment and intimidation." I played the complete footage of the vandalism, the room falling silent as the deliberate destruction unfolded on screen. When the video concluded, Diane stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced desperately, gathering her papers. "Actually," I responded, my voice carrying without effort, "according to Section 7 of the bylaws, a vote of no confidence can be called when evidence of malfeasance is presented. That vote will happen now." The room that had lived under Diane's shadow for years was transformed. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now stood together, ready to reclaim their community from the petty tyrant who had ruled through fear and intimidation for far too long. The aftermath of the confrontation brought swift and comprehensive changes to Oakwood Springs. An emergency election 2 weeks later established a new HOA board comprising diverse homeowners committed to fair and transparent governance. Robert Wilson, despite his mobility challenges, was unanimously elected president, his decades of experience in public administration making him an ideal choice to rebuild trust in the organization. The legal consequences for Diane and her accomplices unfolded on multiple fronts. Criminal charges for vandalism and property destruction were filed based on the security footage. Civil suits from numerous homeowners sought damages for harassment, improper fines, and emotional distress. Most significantly, a state investigation into financial improprieties revealed years of self-dealing, misappropriated funds, and fraudulent accounting that had enriched Diane and her inner circle at the community's expense.